The vampire king's daughter was drowning in mud during the parade, but guards only protected him. A human maid broke forbidden law, pulled the dying princess out, and gave her own blood to save her. What the vampire king did next would either execute the maid or change his kingdom forever. The bells rang at midnight. Not the gentle church bells that called humans to prayer, but the deep, bone-shaking iron bells that announced one thing: the vampire king was riding through his capital. 10-year-old Princess Eleonora pressed her small hands against the velvet cushion of her golden carriage, her heart hammering with excitement she couldn't contain. Through the silk curtains, she watched thousands of faces blur past, vampires and humans alike, all holding torches that turned the night into a river of fire. "Father said I could wave," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. He promised. Her legs, thin and twisted beneath her emerald gown, were secured in silver braces that gleamed in the torchlight. They'd been crafted by the finest metalworkers in the kingdom, but they were still cold, still heavy, still a reminder that while other vampire children ran through moonlit gardens, Eleonora could only watch from her tower window. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't hidden away. Tonight, the king himself had ordered a carriage built just for her, small enough that she could see out, soft enough that every bump wouldn't send pain shooting through her spine. Tonight, she was part of the Nightfall Festival, the grandest celebration in all the vampire territories. "Long live Princess Eleonora," someone shouted from the crowd. Her breath caught. They knew her name. They were cheering for her. She reached for the curtain, desperate to see them properly, to wave back like her father did from his magnificent black stallion ahead. The king sat tall in his armor, his crimson cape flowing behind him like spilled blood. Even from behind, she could see the pride in the set of his shoulders. "He's proud of me," she thought, and the warmth of it was better than any medicine the court physicians had ever given her. Thunder cracked across the sky. Eleonora flinched. The sound was wrong, too sharp, too sudden. The Nightfall Festival had been planned for weeks. The court astronomers had promised clear skies. The witches had cast weather wards. But the second crack of thunder brought something the witches couldn't stop: rain. It fell like a curtain dropping on a stage, heavy and immediate. The torches hissed and sputtered. The crowd screamed, not in celebration now, but in confusion. Eleonora heard her father's horse whinny, a sound of pure animal terror that made her stomach drop. "Hold steady," the king's voice boomed over the chaos. "Form ranks." But the horses pulling Eleonora's carriage didn't understand commands. They understood only fear. The carriage lurched forward violently. Eleonora's head cracked against the wooden frame. Stars exploded across her vision. She tried to grab the safety rail, but her weak grip couldn't hold as the carriage tilted, left, then right, then too far right. The wheel hit something. A rock? A broken cobblestone. It didn't matter. The golden carriage, the one her father had commissioned with so much hope, snapped away from its bolts like a toy. Eleonora felt the world flip. She saw the silk roof where the floor should be. She saw mud where the sky had been. Then she was falling. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Cold, thick mud swallowed her like a living thing, filling her mouth, her nose, covering her eyes. She tried to scream, but the sound came out as bubbles. Her braces, her beautiful silver braces, were tangled in her dress, pulling her down into the mire that the rain had created from the festival road. "Father." She couldn't make the word real. Her arms flailed weakly, but the mud was everywhere, heavy as stone. She couldn't tell which way was up. Her lungs burned. The cold was seeping into her bones, the terrible cold that came when vampire children were too sick, too close to the edge between life and death. Above her, muffled by the mud and water, she heard shouting. "Protect the king. Form a barrier. The princess. The king first." The words stabbed into her fading consciousness. They were leaving her. The guards, trained since birth to protect the royal family, were choosing her father over her. Of course they were. He was the king. He was the kingdom. She was just the broken princess who should have stayed in her tower. The mud pressed harder. Her chest spasmed, trying to find air that wasn't there. The darkness at the edges of her vision wasn't from the mud anymore. It was from inside her, spreading like ink through water. "I'm sorry, father. I wasn't strong enough for the parade after all." Then pressure. Different pressure. Hands, human warm and desperate, digging through the mud around her face. Fingers hooked under her arms, pulling with a strength that felt impossible. Air hit her face like a slap. Elenara gasped, coughed, vomited mud and rainwater onto the ground. Someone was holding her. Someone who smelled like soap and wet cloth and life. Warm human life. So different from the cool perfection of vampire skin. "Breathe," a woman's voice commanded, rough and terrified. "Breathe, little one, please." Elenara's eyes fluttered open. Through the rain and her tears, she saw a face she didn't recognize, a young woman, maybe 20, with brown hair plastered to her skull and eyes wide with fear. Her dress was simple, gray, the kind servants wore. A maid. A human maid was holding the vampire princess in her arms. "Father," Elenara managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll get you to him," the woman promised, wrapping a threadbare cloak around Elenara's shivering body. "I'll get you home. Stay awake. Please stay awake."
But the cold was spreading faster now.
Elenara's vision dimmed again, and this time, she couldn't fight it. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was the woman's voice, cracking with desperation. "Somebody help us. The princess needs help." Nobody came. Morel had been carrying laundry when the world went mad. One moment, she'd been hurrying through the festival crowd with her mistress's clean linens bundled in her arms, trying to get back before the household noticed her absence. The next, thunder had split the sky, and chaos had erupted like a wound. She should have run. Any sensible person would have run. But then she'd seen it, the golden carriage, small and delicate, toppling like a child's toy into the flooded street. She'd seen the guards rush past it, forming a wall of armor around the king's horse. She'd seen them leave the carriage behind. And she'd heard the splashing, the desperate, weak splashing of something small struggling in the mud.
No.
Morel had dropped the laundry, without thinking. Her feet had carried her forward while her mind screamed at her to stop, to remember the laws, to remember what happened to humans who touched vampire royalty without permission.
Death.
Always death. But her hands had already been digging through the mud, and her voice had already been shouting for help that never came, and then, oh gods, then she'd pulled the child free and seen the silver braces, the emerald dress, the small face that had been painted on coins and tapestries throughout the capital. Princess Elenara, the king's only child, the girl the whole kingdom whispered about, the one born wrong, the one who might not survive to see her 11th birthday. "I'm going to die," Morel had thought, even as she'd wrapped the princess in her cloak. "I'm going to die, and my mother will never know what happened to me." That had been 5 minutes ago. Now, Morel ran through the rain-soaked streets with a vampire princess unconscious in her arms, and every guard she passed looked through her like she was invisible, like the girl she carried didn't exist. "Please!" Morel screamed at a group of soldiers reorganizing near a fountain. "The princess needs help. She's hurt." They turned away, following their captain toward the king's last known position. Morel's lungs burned.
Her arms ached.
The princess was small, but Morel had been working since dawn, and her body had nothing left to give. Still, she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The child's skin was growing colder. Too cold. Morel ducked into an alley, pressing her back against the stone wall, trying to catch her breath and think. The princess lay limp against her chest, her lips tinted blue in the faint light from a shuttered window. "No, no, no," Morel whispered, lowering them both to the ground. She pressed her ear to the child's chest. One heartbeat.
Slow.
Then nothing for too long. Then another beat, weaker than the first. Morelle's hands shook as she tried to remember everything she'd ever heard about vampire children. The servants whispered about them constantly, how fragile they were, how different from human babies. They needed blood to survive trauma. They needed warmth, but not human warmth. They needed
Blood.
the word stuck in Morelle's throat like a stone. She'd heard the stories. A human merchant who'd accidentally fed a vampire child during a famine had been executed, even though the child survived. Contamination of royal blood, they'd called it. The merchant's whole family had been cast out. But the princess's heartbeat was fading. Another long pause. Another weak flutter. Morelle looked at her own hands, scarred from years of washing clothes in lye soap, calloused from scrubbing floors. Worthless hands. Common hands. What's the difference? A voice in her head whispered, "You're dead either way. They'll execute you for touching her. At least this way, she lives." "I'm sorry," Morelle said to no one, to everyone, to the gods she wasn't sure were listening. "I'm so sorry." She pulled the small knife she used for cutting thread from her pocket. The blade was dull, but sharp enough. She pressed it to her left palm and dragged it across. Pain flared white-hot, but she barely felt it. Blood welled up, dark red and very human. Morelle tilted the princess's head back, praying she wasn't about to poison a child, praying this was mercy and not murder. She held her palm over the small mouth and let 3 drops fall. The rain stopped. Not gradually, just stopped, like someone had closed a door. The sudden silence was deafening. Morelle's breath caught. Princess Eleonora's eyes snapped open, not the pale blue Morelle had seen before, but glowing faintly, like moonlight through fog. The child gasped, a huge, shuddering breath that seemed to pull air from the entire alley. Then her heart beat.
Once.
Loud enough that Morelle heard it, felt it through the small body in her arms. The princess's eyes found Morelle's face. "Cold," she whispered. "I'm so cold." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Morelle pulled the cloak tighter, standing on trembling legs. "I'm taking you home now. Just stay with me." The castle loomed ahead, its towers black against the clearing sky. Morelle adjusted her grip on the princess and started walking, then running, her bloodied hand leaving prints on the cobblestones. Behind her, she heard the shouts of guards finally organizing a search. Ahead, the castle gates opened, and torchlight spilled out like judgment. Morelle ran toward it anyway, carrying her death sentence in her arms. The castle gates were chaos incarnate. Morelle stumbled through them, barely keeping her feet under her, the princess clutched against her chest. Dozens of guards swarmed the courtyard, their armor clanking as they barked orders at each other. Servants ran with blankets and medical supplies. Somewhere, a woman was crying. "I have her." Morelle's voice cracked as she shouted. "I have the princess." The nearest guard whirled around, his hand flying to his sword hilt. His eyes widened, not with relief, but with horror. "Human," he bellowed. "Human touching the princess. Seize her." Morelle's arms tightened instinctively around Eleonora as 3 guards rushed toward her. "No, wait, she's hurt, she needs." "Put her down." "I can't, Sheil." Hands grabbed Morelle's shoulders, wrenching her backward. She cried out, trying to hold onto the child, but armored fingers pried her grip loose. The princess slipped from her arms with a weak whimper. A female guard caught Eleonora before she could fall, cradling her with practiced care. "Get the physician."
Now.
The human touched her. Another guard snarled, his face twisted with disgust. "She fed her. Look at her hand." All eyes turned to Morelle's bleeding palm, still dripping red onto the white courtyard stones. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. "Contamination," someone whispered. The word spread like fire through dry grass. Contamination. Human blood. Forbidden. Treason. "No," Morelle gasped, struggling against the hands holding her. She was dying. Her heart was stopping. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," the guard captain said coldly, stepping forward. He was older, with scars crossing his pale face like a map of old wars. And you chose to defile the royal bloodline. I chose to save a child. His hand cracked across her face, snapping her head to the side. Pain exploded through her cheek. Blood filled her mouth. You chose to commit treason, he corrected. Take her to the dungeons. The king will decide her fate when he arrives. The king? Morel's voice came out smaller than she intended. Where is he? His Majesty is securing the city. The captain's expression was granite. When he learns what you've done to his daughter, you'll wish we'd killed you quickly. They dragged her across the courtyard. Morel's feet scraped against the stones, her body too exhausted to fight. She craned her neck, trying to catch one last glimpse of the princess, needing to know she was breathing. Through the crowd of guards and servants, she saw the female guard lay Elenara on a stretcher. The child's eyes were closed again, her small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. But rising, falling, still alive. She's breathing, Morel said, almost laughing with relief even as they hauled her toward the dungeon entrance. She's breathing, I didn't. The captain's fist drove into her stomach, cutting off her words. Morel doubled over, gasping. Silence, he commanded. You've done enough damage. The dungeon's stairs were steep and narrow. Morel's knees cracked against stone edges as they descended, but she barely felt it. Her mind was spinning, trying to understand what had happened in that alley. The princess's eyes, they glowed. That heartbeat, it had been so loud, so impossible. And the rain stopping, the sudden silence, as if the world itself had been watching. What did I do? They threw her into a cell that smelled of mold and old despair. The iron door clanged shut, the sound echoing through her bones. The king returns at dawn, the captain said through the bars. Pray he's merciful. Pray the princess survives the night without your common blood poisoning her from the inside. His footsteps faded up the stairs. Morel collapsed against the wall, her body finally giving out. She slid to the floor, cradling her bleeding hand against her chest. The cut had already stopped bleeding, but it throbbed with every heartbeat. Will she survive? The question clawed at her mind. Did I save her or kill her? Hours passed in the darkness. Morel couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the princess's face, the blue lips, the fading heartbeat, those strange glowing eyes. Then, faintly, from somewhere high above in the castle, she heard it. A child's laughter. Weak, but unmistakable.
Alive.
Morel's head fell back against the stone wall. A sob broke from her throat, relief and terror mixed together until she couldn't tell them apart. She's alive, Morel whispered to the darkness. Whatever happens to me, she's alive. The dungeon offered no reply. But somewhere in the castle above, Princess Elenara laughed again, and the sound carried through the stone like a promise or a warning. Dawn was coming, and with it, the Vampire King's judgment. The Vampire King arrived as the first gray light touched the horizon. Morel heard him before she saw him, the thunder of boots on stone, the clatter of armor, the sharp bark of orders that made even the dungeon guards snap to attention. Then came a sound that made her blood freeze, a roar of pure anguish that shook dust from the ceiling. Where is she? Footsteps pounded down the stairs. Morel scrambled to her feet, pressing herself against the back wall of her cell as torchlight flooded the corridor. The king appeared like a storm given form. He was still wearing his parade armor, now caked with mud and streaked with rain. His crimson cape hung heavy and torn. But it was his face that stopped Morel's heart, pale as death, eyes wild with something between rage and terror, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Open it, he commanded. The guard fumbled with the keys. Your Majesty, the human is dangerous. Open. It. The door swung wide. The king filled the entrance, his presence suffocating in the small space. His eyes locked onto Morel, and she saw her death in them. You touched my daughter, he said, each word precise as a blade. Morel's voice came out as barely a whisper. Yes. You fed her your blood. Yes. Knowing the law. Knowing the punishment. Morel lifted her chin, meeting his gaze even as her knees trembled. She was dying, Your Majesty. Her heart was stopping. I couldn't, her voice cracked. I couldn't just watch. The king stepped into the cell. He moved like a predator, slow and deliberate. Morel had nowhere to go, her back already against the wall. He stopped inches from her, so close she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell the rain still clinging to his hair. My daughter, he said softly, dangerously, has been ill since birth. Weak lungs. Fragile bones. A heart that beats wrong. His hand shot out, gripping Morel's jaw, forcing her to look at him. Every physician in this kingdom has tried to cure her. Every alchemist, every witch, every priest. Nothing worked. Nothing ever worked. Tears spilled down Morel's cheeks. I'm sorry. She's walking. The words didn't make sense. Morel blinked. What? The king's grip loosened slightly, his expression shifting into something Morel couldn't read. Confusion, wonder, fear all mixed together. My daughter, he repeated slowly, is walking. Not with her braces. Not with assistance. Walking on her own, through the medical wing, laughing like I've never heard her laugh. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Her skin is warm. Her heartbeat is strong. She ate breakfast. Ate, not picked at, and asked for more. Morel's mind reeled.
But
That's good, isn't it? I don't know what it is. The king released her suddenly, stepping back, running a hand through his wet hair. My advisors are screaming about contamination. The priests are calling it a curse. The physicians can't explain it. He turned back to her, and now she saw the truth in his eyes. Not rage, but desperation. What did you do to my daughter? I don't know, Morel said honestly. I gave her blood. 3 drops. That's all. Human blood kills vampire children. It's supposed to poison them, weaken them further. It's never, he stopped, shaking his head. This shouldn't be possible. Footsteps echoed down the stairs, lighter, faster. A young voice called out. Father? Father, where did you go? The king's eyes widened. Eleonora, no, you shouldn't be down here. But the princess was already rounding the corner, her small hand clutching her nurse's sleeve for balance, but only balance, not support. She was moving on her own, her thin legs carrying her weight in a way they never had before. When she saw Morel, her face lit up like sunrise. Maid, she cried, pulling free from the nurse and actually rushing into the cell. Eleonora, the king moved to stop her, but froze as his daughter threw her arms around Morel's waist. Morel stood paralyzed, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. You saved me, Eleonora said, looking up with eyes that were bright and clear and so alive. Father, she saved me. She pulled me from the mud. She gave me her warmth when I was cold. The princess turned to face the king. Don't hurt her, please. The king stared at his daughter, at her flushed cheeks, her steady stance, the strength in her small body that had never been there before. Morel watched emotions war across his face. Fear, confusion, hope he seemed afraid to feel. Finally, he knelt, bringing himself eye level with Eleonora. How do you feel, my darling? Strong, Eleonora said simply. For the first time ever, Father, I feel strong. The king's jaw worked. He reached out, touching his daughter's face with trembling fingers, as if confirming she was real. Then he stood and turned to the guards. Release her. Your Majesty, the captain protested. The law. The law, the king interrupted, his voice hard as iron, did not account for miracles. 3 days passed like a fever dream. Morel was moved from the dungeon to a small room in the servants' wing, locked but comfortable. Guards stood outside her door at all hours. She was brought food, water, clean clothes, but no answers. No one would tell her what was happening, what the king had decided, whether she would live or die. On the morning of the fourth day, the lock clicked open. Morel sat up on her cot, her heart hammering, expecting guards. Instead, a small figure slipped through the door, closing it quickly behind her. Princess Eleonora pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes sparkling with mischief. She wore a simple white dress, her hair in a loose braid, and, most shocking of all, no braces. Her feet were bare against the stone floor. "You shouldn't be here," Morel whispered urgently. "If they catch you." "They won't." Eleonora crossed the room with steps that were still careful, still learning, but hers. "The guards think I'm napping. I climbed out my window." "You climbed?" Morel's eyes widened. "Princess, you could have fallen." "But I didn't," Eleonora grinned, and it transformed her whole face. "I can do things now. Real things. Yesterday I actually ran down the hall. My nurse cried." Her expression softened. "Happy tears, I think." Morel's throat tightened. "I'm glad you're well." "I'm more than well." Eleonora sat on the edge of the cot, studying Morel's face with unsettling intensity. "I can feel my heartbeat now. Before, it was so quiet I could barely tell it was there. But now it's like drums." Strong drums. She reached out, taking Morel's bandaged hand gently. "Is this because of your blood?" "I don't know," Morel admitted. "I don't understand what happened. Father says it's impossible. The priests say it's unnatural." Eleonora's grip tightened slightly. "But I heard the kitchen maids talking. They said miracles don't follow rules." Before Morel could respond, voices erupted in the hallway. "Find the princess now. Check every room. If something's happened to her." Eleonora's eyes went wide. She started to stand, but Morel pulled her close, sheltering her instinctively as the door burst open. The king filled the doorway, still in his court robes, face pale with panic. When he saw Eleonora safe in Morel's arms, the terror drained from his expression, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. "Eleonora," he said, voice carefully controlled. "You cannot keep doing this." "I wanted to see her," Eleonora said, not letting go of Morel. "She's been alone for days. She's under palace watch for her own protection." The king stepped into the room, and Morel noticed he moved differently now, less like a king inspecting a prisoner, more like a father who'd run too far, too fast. "And you're supposed to be resting," the physician said. "The physicians don't know anything about me anymore," Eleonora interrupted. "Yesterday I went outside, into the garden. The sun was rising." The king froze. "The sun. It didn't burn me, father." "It was warm," Eleonora's voice filled with wonder. "I touched flowers. I chased a butterfly. It landed on my hand, and I could feel its wings beating." Morel watched the king's face, saw the moment wonder overtook fear. He moved to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. Morning light spilled in, and he held his hand in the beam. His skin didn't smoke or blister, but he withdrew anyway, old instincts too strong. "Vampire children don't chase butterflies in sunlight," he said quietly. "This one does." Eleonora stood, walking to her father. "I'm still your daughter.
I'm still me.
I'm just more me now." The king looked down at her, then across at Morel. His expression was unreadable. "Leave us," he commanded the guards in the hallway. "All of you."
Now.
They obeyed, and the door clicked shut. The king knelt before his daughter, taking her small hands in his. "Eleonora, do you understand what's happening to you? What this might mean? That human kindness is stronger than vampire rules?" Eleonora suggested. A sound escaped the king, almost a laugh, but broken. "You make it sound simple, isn't it?" The princess looked between her father and Morel. "She saved me. I'm better. What else matters?" "Everything else matters," the king said, but his voice was gentle. "The council, the ancient laws, the fear that—" He stopped himself, glancing at Morel. "That this could be used to harm you somehow. Or," Eleonora said slowly, "the fear that it proves vampires aren't as powerful as they pretend to be." The king's expression hardened. Careful, daughter. It's what I heard the nobles saying. Eleonora's voice was steady, older than her years. They're not afraid I'm sick. They're afraid I'm proof that humans can do what they cannot. Silence filled the room, heavy, dangerous. Finally, the king stood. He looked at Morel properly for the first time, really seeing her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Morel, your majesty." "Morel," he repeated. "Do you understand that you've created a problem that could tear this kingdom apart?" Morel swallowed hard. "I understand that I saved a child, your majesty. Whatever comes after, I'd do it again." The king studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. "So would I." The throne room had never felt so cold. Morel stood in the center of the marble floor, her wrists bound in silver chains that burned against her skin. Around her, the semicircle of the High Council sat in elevated seats, 12 vampire nobles whose combined age exceeded a millennium. Their faces were masks of disdain and barely concealed rage. She'd been brought here an hour after the king's visit, given no time to prepare, no explanation beyond a guard's curt, "The council demands judgment." The king sat on his throne, expression carefully neutral. To his right, slightly behind, Princess Eleonora watched from a smaller chair, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Let the record show," Lord Casimir began, his voice dripping with contempt, "that the human Morel stands accused of the following crimes: touching royal blood without permission, feeding contaminated human blood to the heir of the vampire throne, and, most grievously, altering the natural order of our species." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles filling the gallery. "How does the accused plead?" Lady Thorne asked, her ancient face sharp as a blade. "I plead." Morel's voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "I plead that I saved a child's life. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" Lord Casimir stood, his robes sweeping the floor. "You've poisoned the princess with human weakness. Look at her, warm skin, tolerance for sunlight, eating regular food like a common peasant. You've stripped away her vampire nature." "I've done no such thing," Morel protested. "She's stronger than before." "Exactly." Lady Thorne's fist crashed against her podium. "A vampire child should not become stronger from human blood. It defies every law of nature, every understanding we have of our own kind. Which means this is not medicine, it's corruption." The king's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "Your Majesty," Lord Casimir turned to the throne. "We sympathize with a father's relief at his daughter's recovery. But sentiment cannot override duty. The law is clear. Humans who contaminate royal blood must be executed."
"No exceptions."
"Not even for," he sneered the next word, "miracles. The law," the king said quietly, "was written to protect against harm, not to punish salvation." "Was it salvation?" Lady Thorne challenged. "Or the first stage of some insidious curse?" "My lord, we cannot know the long-term effects of this abomination. The princess may yet suffer consequences we cannot foresee." "I feel fine." Eleonora's voice rang out, young and clear. "Princess, please," Lord Casimir said with false kindness. "You are a child. You cannot understand the complexities." "I understand that I was dying." Eleonora stood, and the room fell silent. "I understand that my heart was stopping. I understand that every one of you visited me last year and told father to prepare for the inevitable." Her voice shook, but didn't break. "I understand that none of you saved me. She did." "Sit down, child," Lady Thorne commanded.
"No."
The word dropped like a stone. Even the king's eyes widened slightly. "Princess Eleonora," Lord Casimir's voice hardened, "you will respect this council's authority."
"Why?"
Eleonora stepped down from her chair, moving toward the center of the room. Guards shifted nervously, but the king raised a hand, stopping them. "Why should I respect a council that wants to kill the person who gave me life? We want to preserve the purity of—" "I can't use my braces anymore," Eleonora interrupted, her voice suddenly louder, filling the vast chamber. Do you know why? She reached down and unfastened the clasp on her dress, letting it drop slightly to reveal her legs, thin, scarred from years of metal pressing against skin, but straight.
Whole.
They don't fit, she continued, because my bones grew. In 3 days, my bones grew more than they had in 3 years. The physicians measured. They documented it. Gasps echoed through the gallery. That's impossible, Lady Thorne whispered. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Eleonora's hands clenched into fists. Everything about this is impossible. But it happened. I happened. She took another step forward, and Morel saw what she was doing, walking without support, without hesitation, in front of everyone. Then Eleonora did something no one expected. She stood on one leg, lifting the other, balancing perfectly in the center of the throne room. The room erupted. Nobles shot to their feet. Someone shouted for the physicians. Lady Thorne clutched her chest as if struck. But Eleonora held the position, steady as stone, for 5 heartbeats. Then she lowered her leg and turned to face her father. I couldn't do that yesterday, she said simply. I'll be able to do more tomorrow. She walked to Morel, taking the older girl's chained hands in her own small ones. So, ask yourselves, what's more important? Your laws, or a future where children like me don't have to hide in towers? The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Casimir found his voice first. This proves nothing except that the contamination runs deeper than we thought. Your Majesty, we demand immediate execution.
No.
The king's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of mountains. He stood, and the room held its breath. The king descended from his throne with deliberate slowness, each step echoing through the silent chamber. He moved past his daughter, past Morel, until he stood facing the council directly, not above them on his throne, but at eye level, a king choosing to meet judgment as an equal. No, he repeated, and this time the word carried steel. There will be no execution. Lord Casimir's face flushed with anger. Your Majesty, you cannot simply. I am the king. His voice cut through the protest like a blade through silk. I can do precisely as I choose. The question is whether you will accept my judgment, or whether this council wishes to challenge the throne itself. The threat hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Lady Thorne recovered first, her voice carefully measured. My lord, we would never presume to challenge your authority. We merely seek to uphold the laws that have protected our kind for centuries. Protected us from what? The king turned, his gaze sweeping across the assembled nobles. From hope? From change? From the possibility that we might be wrong? From chaos? Lord Casimir slammed his hand against the podium. These laws exist because our ancestors learned hard lessons. Human blood weakens vampire children. This is biological fact, not prejudice. Then explain, my daughter. The simple question silenced the lord mid-breath. Explain, the king continued, his voice dropping to something more dangerous, how human blood, which should have killed her, instead gave her strength. Explain how the weak, human compassion you all despise succeeded where centuries of vampire medicine failed. He paused, letting the words sink in. Explain how a lowborn maid loved my daughter enough to risk death, while the guards I've trained and honored for decades left her to drown in mud. Lord Casimir's mouth opened, closed. No words came. You can't explain it, the king said, because it breaks your understanding of the world. It terrifies you. And rather than face that terror, rather than question whether our old certainties might be false, you'd rather kill the evidence. That's not, Lady Thorne began. It's exactly that, the king's eyes blazed. I've watched my daughter suffer for 10 years. 10 years of watching her struggle to breathe, to move, to simply live. 10 years of the finest vampire physicians telling me there was no hope, that her condition was inherent to her nature, unchangeable. His voice cracked slightly. And in one night, a human maid with nothing but kindness did what none of you could. Eleonora was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. So here is my decree. the king said, his voice rising to fill every corner of the throne room. Not as a father, but as your king. He turned to face the full assembly, council, nobles, guards, servants, all who had crowded into the chamber to witness judgment. The law forbidding humans from aiding vampire royalty is hereby abolished. Effective immediately, no person, human or vampire, will be punished for showing compassion, for offering aid, for choosing life over ancient prejudice. Chaos erupted. Nobles shouted. Council members rose in protest. But the king raised his hand, and the room gradually quieted. Furthermore, he continued, Morel, daughter of... He glanced at her questioningly. Anna, your majesty, Morel whispered, her voice shaking. My mother is Anna. Morel, daughter of Anna, is hereby appointed as blood guardian to Princess Eleonora. She will oversee the princess's continued recovery and serve as her companion and protector. This is madness. Lord Casimir roared. You cannot elevate a commoner to... I can, and I have. The king's voice turned cold. Unless the council wishes to formally declare no confidence in the throne. In which case, I invite you to try. The threat was clear. Challenge this and face civil war. Lady Thorne's ancient eyes narrowed. For a long moment, she studied the king, then Eleonora, then Morel. Finally, slowly, she bowed her head. The council accepts your majesty's decree. Lord Casimir looked at her in betrayal. You cannot be serious. I am perfectly serious. Lady Thorne's voice was tired, suddenly old in a way that centuries hadn't made her. Look at the child, Casimir. Truly look at her. All eyes turned to Eleonora. She stood straight, her hand still holding Morel's chains, her face streaked with tears but her body radiating a strength that was undeniable, unmistakable. She's alive, Lady Thorne said softly. Against all odds, against all precedent, she's alive and thriving. Perhaps, she paused, the admission clearly costing her. Perhaps that matters more than being right. Lord Casimir's face twisted with fury, but he saw the truth in the room, the other council members nodding, the nobles whispering with something that might have been hope, the servants watching with tears in their eyes. He had lost. The king turned to the guards. Remove her chains. The silver cuffs fell away. Morel's wrists were burned red beneath them, but she barely felt the pain. She was too busy trying to understand that she was alive, that she was free. Eleonora threw her arms around Morel's waist. Heart Maid, she whispered. The king approached them both. He knelt, bringing himself to his daughter's level, and then, shocking everyone, he reached out and took Morel's burned hand in his own. Thank you, he said simply, for showing me what power is truly for. Morel couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She could only nod. The king stood, facing his court one final time. If human kindness gives life, then cruelty has no throne here. Let that be the law we build our future upon. He turned and left the throne room, his crimson cape flowing behind him. And for the first time in the kingdom's history, a human maid walked beside a vampire princess, hand in hand, as equals. 6 months later, spring came to the vampire kingdom. Morel walked through the palace gardens at dawn, a time that had once been forbidden to vampire kind, now claimed as a quiet hour of peace. Dew clung to rose petals, and somewhere nearby, a thrush sang its morning song. You're too slow. She turned to see Eleonora racing down the garden path, her bare feet flying across the stones. The princess had grown 3 inches since the autumn festival. The physicians documented everything now, filling volumes with observations that rewrote centuries of vampire medicine. I'm savoring the morning, Morel called back, laughing. Not all of us have endless energy. That's because you're still sleepy. Eleonora skidded to a stop beside her, barely winded. Father says we start lessons with the human children today. Are you nervous? Morel considered the question. The king's second decree, integrating human and vampire children in the palace schools, had been even more controversial than the first. 3 council members had resigned. 2 noble families had left court entirely. But slowly, cautiously, others had begun to support the change. A little, Morel admitted. Change is always frightening. But necessary, the voice came from behind them. The king emerged from the morning mist, dressed simply in dark robes rather than his formal regalia. He'd taken to walking the gardens at dawn too, drawn by his daughter's newfound love of sunrise. Morel still wasn't entirely comfortable around him. He was still the king, after all, but something had shifted between them that day in the throne room. The first families arrive within the hour, he continued, falling into step beside them. Human merchants' children mostly. Their parents are cautiously optimistic. And terrified, Morel added quietly. That too, he smiled slightly. As am I. Elenara took her father's hand on one side, Morel's on the other. It will work, she said with the absolute certainty only children possess. It has to. They walked in silence for a moment, 3 figures in the growing light. A king learning to embrace dawn, a princess who embodied 2 worlds, and a maid who'd accidentally changed history. I received a letter from the Eastern Territories, the king said eventually. Lord Victor's grandson. The boy has the same condition Elenara had. Weak lungs, failing heart, he paused. They're asking if the treatment could be replicated. Morel's breath caught. Your Majesty, I don't even know what I did. I know. The physicians don't either. They've theorized that it's something about genuine compassion, about the intention behind the gift. He looked down at his daughter. Or perhaps it's simply that love is stronger than we understood. Will you let them try? Elenara asked. The king was quiet for a long time. They'd reached the eastern wall of the gardens, where the city spread out below, smoke rising from morning fires, the first merchants opening their stalls, life beginning anew. Yes, he said finally. With proper safeguards, proper documentation. If this can help others, he trailed off, but Morel understood. A king's duty wasn't just to preserve the old ways, it was to embrace the new ones when they offered hope. A bell rang from the palace, signaling the hour. The families will be arriving, Morel said. Elenara squeezed both their hands. Then we should greet them. Together. They walked back through the gardens, but the king paused at the entrance, his expression thoughtful. Elenara, he said. Before we begin, I have something for you. He reached into his robes and pulled out a small wooden box. When he opened it, morning light caught on silver, Elenara's old braces, polished and carefully preserved. The princess stared at them, her expression unreadable. I had them mounted for the royal archive, the king said softly, as a reminder, not of suffering, but of how far we've come. Of what changed between then and now. He knelt before his daughter. You don't have to keep them, but I thought you should choose. Elenara reached out, touching the cold metal gently. Morel watched emotions flicker across the child's face, pain, memory, something that might have been gratitude. Keep them in my room, Elenara said finally. On the shelf where I can see them. Because Maid is right. Change is frightening. And I never want to forget what it cost, or who paid the price. She looked at Morel, and in her eyes was a wisdom beyond her years. The king closed the box, nodding. As you wish. Inside the palace, voices rose, children's laughter, nervous parents' questions, the careful negotiations of a new world being born. Elenara started toward the sound, then turned back. Father, she asked, do you think hearts can really have 2 kinds of blood? It was the question she'd asked months ago, when everything was still uncertain. But now the king's answer came, without hesitation. He smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. They already do, my child. Yours does. And because of you, perhaps one day, all of ours will too. Elenara grinned and ran ahead, her voice calling out greetings to the arriving families. The king and Morel stood together in the doorway, watching her go. She's extraordinary, Morel said quietly. She is, the king paused. As are you, Morel of House. I realize I never asked your family name. I don't have one, your majesty. Just Morel. Then perhaps it's time that changed, he looked at her thoughtfully. Morel, heart gift. For the gift you gave and the heart you showed. Tears pricked Morel's eyes. A name. A real name. Granted by the king himself. I thank you, your majesty. No, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you for reminding me what kingdoms are built upon. Not fear, not tradition, but the courage to choose compassion when it costs everything. Together, they walked into the palace, into the sounds of children learning to see each other not as human or vampire, but simply as children. And high above, in Eleonora's room, the silver braces caught the morning light. A memorial to suffering ended, a promise of futures chosen freely, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with the smallest acts of love. The dawn had come to the vampire kingdom. And it was only the beginning.